Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Now today we'll be making German chocolate cake, and what we're going to do is we're going to use Devil's Food chocolate cake for the cake part, and then we're going to make the German chocolate filling for the German chocolate part, and then we're going to ice it with chocolate Swiss buttercream that we haven't made in a pretty long while, so I would like to make it again. So one of the first things you want to do is you want to get your two 9-inch cake round pans ready. What you do is you grease them with some pan release, usually Pam spray, and then all you need to do is put a piece of parchment paper right in the middle. And that's because if your cake sticks in the middle, then it's pretty much stuck. But if it doesn't stick in the middle, then it's a good chance the rest of it can pop out. It's almost certain. And I've never needed a piece of parchment paper to go around the entire pan. So all you need to do is put it right in the middle, and you're good to go. Another thing you might want to do ahead of time is you might want to go ahead and get your toasted coconut and your pecans ready for your German chocolate filling. And that's just because you need to toast them in the oven, and your cake's going to be in the oven. So this is going to save you some time. Your toasted coconut, you need 6 ounces, and you need 10 ounces of toasted pecans. You just toast them in the oven on a sheet pan on a flat layer for, let's say, at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for about 8 to 10 minutes. Make sure you stir it in between. And then for the pecans, you want to roughly chop them up in a food processor. You don't want them pulverized into powder. You want to have uneven pieces so that way it still has some chunks in it. But you don't want to have whole pecans either because it doesn't stir very well in the filling. So once you have them all cut up, they're going to be folded into the recipe together, so you can put them in the same bowl and then just put them to the side. Okay, and then the next step is you want to go ahead and weigh out all your ingredients. For my dry ingredients over here in this bowl that need to be sifted, and I'll show you that in a little bit, we have 11.5 ounces of all-purpose flour, 1.5 ounces of unsweetened cocoa powder, 1/4 ounce of salt, 1/4 ounce of baking soda. And those need to be sifted together, and I'll show you how to do that. You also need 4 ounces of shortening. I like to use butter-flavored shortening. You need 10.5 ounces of water. It could be cold water or warm water, doesn't matter. Don't want to use hot water, really. And then you need to weigh out, 5 ounces of granulated sugar. And then after we use it, we're going to use it to make the cold meringue, the French meringue with the egg whites. So then we can use the same bowl, and we'll weigh out 6.5 ounces of granulated sugar in that same bowl. So altogether, you need 11.5 ounces of granulated sugar. You also need some vanilla extract, just about 1/8 of an ounce, and then we need 3 separated eggs, so 3 egg yolks and 3 egg whites. And I'll show you how to separate an egg yolk or an egg. And then and that's all of our ingredients weighed out. And so one of the first things you want to do to get ready is you want to wipe out your electric mixer bowl with a little bit of vinegar as well as the whip attachment, and that's to help break down any fat residue that may still be inside the bowl even after you've washed it with hot soapy water. And that's because any fat that may be in the bowl or on the whip can interfere with the process of making the meringue. It will inhibit the egg whites from whipping up, which is also why you want to make sure that your eggs are also separated very well. Any egg yolk left in the egg white can prevent it from whipping up as well. Okay, so as I said before, you need 3 egg whites and 3 egg yolks. Now I've already separated 2 into my bowl, so I need 1 more, and so I'll show you how to separate the egg yolk, or the egg white. So just break your egg open carefully, pull the shell apart, and let the egg white drip down, and pass the egg yolk back and forth. Now if you're doing lots of eggs, if you need lots of egg yolks and lots of egg whites, you might want to separate them into a separate bowl before putting them into your mixer bowl, because you don't want to taint. Let's say you're separating like 8 eggs. You don't want to separate or taint your eggs because, let's say, you had a bloody egg or you messed up and broke the yolk, and then you lose all 8 eggs. So as opposed to just 1. So anyway, once you've separated your egg, put your egg yolk in a separate bowl, and you're ready to put this on the mixer. Okay, and before we get started with that, I'm going to show you how to, I'm going to show you what I meant by sift. Basically what we're doing is we are combining all of our dry ingredients. Remember, this is our all-purpose flour, our cocoa powder, our salt, and our baking soda, and we're going to sift them together. And what this does is it helps mix and aerate them. But the big thing, especially with the cocoa powder and baking soda, is it helps break up all those chunks that could stay in your batter even after properly mixing it. You don't want to have any chunks because it just just makes your finished product all lumpy. Your batter is going to be lumpy too, and it's just not going to be very professional, very good tasting. So the best way and the easiest way to do it is to sift all your ingredients together, which breaks up all the chunks and makes it into nice manageable pieces for your batter. Okay, so bring your egg whites over to the mixer, as well as your 5 ounces of granulated sugar. And go ahead and start mixing them. And then what you want to do is, once they start getting frothy, you want to go ahead and slowly add in your granulated sugar in a slow drizzle. Okay, now that our egg whites are frothy, let's go ahead and slowly add in our granulated sugar. This is going to go ahead and help our egg whites become a meringue. Okay, so we're at medium stiff peaks. As you can see, the peak is pretty much holding its shape as we took it out of the mixer, but it's still curving a little bit to the left, so it's still a little bit soft. You don't want them to be super stiff because it won't fold super easily into the batter. So it's a little bit better to have a softer or a more closer to the medium peak. So the next thing you want to do is you want to take out your egg whites and put them in a separate bowl. Then put your egg yolks and 6.5 ounces of sugar together. I actually got this recipe mixed up with a different recipe. I got it mixed up with the vanilla chiffon genoise, which whips up both the egg whites and the egg yolks. This one only whips up the egg whites. But we're going to go ahead and mix them together since I've already got them blended together. But I'll show you I'll tell you the right way to do it. So, sorry about messing that up. I just got ahead of myself. Normally, you want to mix together your shortening and your sugar at the same time as a creaming method kind of process, and mix them together. And then you add your egg yolks one at a time to that, so that way it doesn't break or scramble or anything like that. Unfortunately, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to do it similar to the vanilla chiffon genoise since I've already started that way. So I'm going to go ahead and continue whipping my egg yolks to ribbon stage. But just follow the recipe. You don't need to do it this way. Okay, so remember, whip your shortening in a bowl to get it softened up. Then add the 6.5 ounces of sugar. Mix them together in a creaming kind of style and get them light and fluffy. And then add your egg yolks one at a time until they come together. And eventually, you're going to get to a point where it looks like this. I took a little bit of a different path there because, got a little mixed up, but that's okay. So once you get to this point, go ahead and add in a little bit of vanilla extract, about 1/8 of an ounce, about a teaspoon. You don't have to measure it. Go ahead and whip that in. Okay, and after you finish whipping up your egg whites, you probably want to switch over to a paddle, which is probably why I got confused because I didn't remember to switch over to a paddle. Then this is what you use to cream together your sugar and your shortening, and then your egg yolks, and then your vanilla extract. So then once you've whipped all that up, we're going to go ahead and add in some of our dry ingredients. I'm going to put about half of it in there. Mix it on low speed so we don't get a whole lot of flour and stuff kicking back at us, and so that we don't break our mixer either. Okay, then we're going to add half of the water. And then we're going to add half of the dry ingredients again, and then after the dry ingredients get mixed in, we're going to add in half of the water. Okay, so our egg whites, we're going to take about 1/3 of it, put it into our mixed batter, and we're going to fold it in. And what we're doing is we are lightening up the batter so that way it's more like the meringue in consistency. So that way any extra additions we add in will lose less volume, because our first addition is going to lose a lot of volume, because basically what we're doing is we're just mixing it in together to make it lighter. But a lot of the air cells that we whipped into the meringue are getting smashed and crushed, and so we want to make sure to preserve them as much as we can. So what we do is we sacrifice the first third, and then the second and third will lose less volume. So before your egg white is completely folded in, go ahead and add in another third. Carefully fold that one in. Okay, so once you have your cake batter lightened by all of the egg whites, go ahead and put it into your cake pans. You want to fill up your cake pans about halfway up, because it will rise a little bit. Make sure to smooth out your batter a little bit so that way it's all the way to the edge, and that way there's no lumps or anything like that. We're going to go ahead and bake these in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes or so. It should probably take closer to 25 minutes, but we'll check it at 20 minutes. And when you check it, make sure you insert a toothpick or a knife or something into the center, pull it out. If the knife or the toothpick has any residue on it, then the cake is not finished because it's still wet inside. You want to make sure it's dry inside. So leave it about 5 to 6 more minutes in the oven and test it again. So while your cakes are cooling down, remember that you tested them to make sure that they were finished all the way and they're cooling down in the pans. You want to go ahead and weigh out the rest of your ingredients for your filling and for your Swiss buttercream. So for your Swiss buttercream, you need 4 egg whites. Remember to wipe out your bowl with some vinegar. Even though this isn't what we're going to be mixing it in, you still want to wipe it out. And 2 egg yolks that you're using, that you separated from the egg whites, can go into a separate bowl. And this is going to be used for the filling. And with the filling, you can go ahead and put in 4 ounces of granulated sugar. Make sure to whisk your egg yolks and your sugar together, because granulated sugar can chemically cook egg yolks and turn it into chunky, or make it chunky, basically. So you want to make sure you whisk it together, because it doesn't affect it the same way when you whisk it together. Then for your rest of your ingredients for the German chocolate cake filling, on the pot we have 4 ounces of butter, which is a stick of butter. We have 8 ounces of heavy cream and 4 ounces of granulated sugar in the pot on the stove. And we'll go over there in just a second. For the rest of your Swiss buttercream, you want to go ahead and weigh out 10 ounces or 5 ounces of granulated sugar and 3.5 ounces of powdered sugar. You went ahead and sifted it. Go ahead and sift it. Keep your sifter handy, because we're going to use it for the cocoa powder when we flavor it. And then for your butter, you want to have 13.5 ounces, which comes out to be about a little bit more than 3 sticks of butter. So that's for your Swiss buttercream. So right now, we're going to go ahead and make the filling for our German chocolate cake filling. Okay, so remember on the stove we have 4 ounces of butter, or 1 stick, 8 ounces of heavy cream, and 4 ounces of granulated sugar. And we're going to go ahead and boil those together. Okay, once your heavy cream mixture has come to a boil, go ahead and temper your egg yolks. And to do that, you just continuously whisk your egg yolks while pouring in the hot liquid. And what this does is it slowly warms up your egg yolks, so that way they don't get scrambled when you add the hot liquid. So if you were just to dump the hot liquid straight into the egg yolks, it would just basically turn into a sweet omelet. So remember to go ahead and continuously whisk it while you're slowly drizzling it in. Okay. Reduce your heat to about medium-high. Put your tempered egg mixture back into the bowl, or the pot. Go ahead and quickly rinse out your bowl. Okay, I went ahead and just washed it with some soap because it had raw egg in it. And then what you want to do is you want to just bring your egg mixture to a boil again. This is going to thicken it. You want to continuously continuously stir it while scraping the bottom. Make sure you scrape the bottom so that way the bottom doesn't get burnt. What we're doing is we're just trying to thicken up the egg yolks. Okay, looks like we've come to a boil. Let's go ahead and take this off the stove. Okay, and we just need to go ahead and cool this off in the refrigerator. To keep it from forming a skin, make sure you scrape it down systematically or periodically while it's cooling down so that way the skin doesn't form. And now, while we are waiting for this to cool down, we'll go ahead and make our Swiss buttercream. Okay, now to make Swiss buttercream, you're going to have a double boiler. You don't really need it to be boiling crazily. You just need to have a little bit of a simmer. We're going to go ahead and bring our bowl with the 4 egg whites, and we also have 5 ounces of granulated sugar in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to warm this up to 120 degrees. You want to continuously stir it, but you don't want to really whip any air into it. You're just trying to make sure the heat is evenly distributed and that no part of the egg will get cooked. You want to make sure that you don't end up accidentally cooking the egg either. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and whip up our egg whites until it reaches medium to stiff peaks. Okay, so we're around medium to stiff peaks. You can see that the peak is holding its shape, but it's not. It's holding its shape, but it's somewhat falling over, but it's not completely curving down. So we're at a good stiffness. So we're going to go ahead and add our room temperature butter. Remember, it's 13.5 ounces. Let's go ahead and add all your butter all at once. You can do it in parts if you like, but I just put it all at once. Okay, and we're just going to whip that in slow until the butter is incorporated. Or low, not slow, sorry. Actually, we need to add in our 3.5 ounces of powdered sugar. This is going to help with the consistency as well as the sweetness. Okay, now at this point, if you wanted to make vanilla Swiss buttercream, you just go ahead and add some vanilla extract and then you're good to go. But we're making chocolate. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some cocoa powder. Now I'm using a cocoa powder that my friend Sally over at Fran's Cake and Candy gave me. It's a more professional grade cocoa powder than your Hershey's cocoa or even your Ghirardelli cocoa powder. Feel free to use those cocoa powders, it's completely fine. But she says that the cocoa powder she uses at her, this one she sells at her store, is a little bit more conducive to making icing. It's a little bit better for making icing than the other cocoa powders that are available. I'm not sure, this is my first time using it. She gave it to me a year ago and I have yet to use it. So finally getting around to using it, so we're going to go ahead and give it a try. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and try it and see how it comes out. So we're going to add 2 tablespoons of cocoa butter or cocoa powder at a time and see how it affects our icing. We could probably add up to 4. Remember, we don't want to create a paste, we just want to create an icing. Alright, we're at a good consistency and a good flavor. And this cocoa powder is really good. This icing is one of the best tasting icings I've ever made. I could eat this on slap it on some cookies and eat it. So let me get that brand of cocoa powder for you guys. This is also one of my better Swiss buttercreams. I don't make Swiss buttercream a lot. If you guys follow me at all, you know that I usually make Italian buttercream. Swiss buttercream, the advantage is it's a little bit easier to make than Italian buttercream, but Italian buttercream is supposed to be the more premier buttercream. And I've just made it so much that I'm just, it's just second nature to me. But whenever I make Swiss buttercream, I always forget how easy it is. You just warm up the egg whites on the stove and you're pretty much done. That's like the most difficult part. With an Italian buttercream, you have to make a sugar syrup and heat it to a certain temperature and time it with the whipping of the egg whites, and it can be a little confusing. The one thing about Swiss buttercream that's a little bit that you can mess up a little bit is if you don't take the temperature correctly, if your egg whites are still a little cold, they're retaining water. What happens is when we're cooking on the stove, not only is it melting the sugar, but it's also evaporating some water out of the egg whites. So as more egg whites, or as more water evaporates out of the egg whites, the stronger the product gets because, there's less water, more egg proteins. So if you have too much water, it can be a really soupy, soft icing. And, refrigerating it can help. But if your icing's just super soft, then, it's going to just get super soft again once you start icing your cake or when it's already iced and it starts rolling off your cake. So just be aware of that. But generally speaking, Swiss buttercream is easier to make than Italian buttercream, but more difficult to make than, say, an American buttercream or a fudge icing. So anyway, let's go ahead and take this off the mixer. Okay, so now that our filling is cooling, I also have our icing in the refrigerator. We can go ahead and get our cake ready to be made. So remember, this is our 2 layers. We have 2 layers of Devil's Food chocolate cake. So we're going to go ahead and release them now. Go ahead and run your knife along the sides of the pan. Usually if you cook your cake properly after it comes out of the oven, it should pull away. So you shouldn't have too many issues, but just in case it sticks somewhere. Then taking a 9-inch cake circle, flip it over, and should pop right out. And if it doesn't, give it a good tap. There you go. Go ahead and peel off the parchment paper center. And then I'm going to go ahead and flip it back over because we are going to cut this dome off so that way we have a nice smooth flat top, nice even top. So I'm going to go ahead and release the other cake. Okay, so all we're going to do is we're going to cut off the dome shape of the top of the cake. Now underneath my 9-inch cake circle I have a damp paper towel, which is going to help keep my cake from wiggling around while I'm cutting it and trying to hold it in place. So look for the lowest part of your cake. Then go ahead and score it all the way around. Okay, now at this point, if you want to use the floss method, which is when you take a piece of floss and then pull it taut, it'll cut off the layer pretty nicely. I just prefer to use a knife. It's just what I've always done. So what you do is you kind of just slowly cut into the cake. You want to hold your knife kind of slightly downward, like I'm going to over-exaggerate, because what's going to happen is while you're going into your cake, especially if it's a very stiff cake, this is not very necessarily stiff, but in general you want to do this. For stiffer cakes, your knife will kind of push upward. If you're going just like perpendicular flat, your cake will naturally push your knife upward, and you'll create this triangle dome in the middle of your cake. So counter that by slightly angling it downward, and that'll help make sure that you have a nice flat cake layer. I lost my place. There we go. Alright, so go ahead and let's cut this top layer off. I'm messing up. There we go. Okay. Remember to turn your turntable around really quickly, or not quickly, but continuously while you're cutting it, so that way your cake layer stays even. And looks like I went a little lower on one edge than the other, and I felt that happening, but it was too late to fix it. But that's okay. We can just fill it on with a little bit more filling and balance it out. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and actually, what you can do with the leftover of this part of the cake is you can save it in a container and freeze it and use it for like bread pudding or whatever, or just snack on. I wouldn't just throw this away because you spent so much time and money making this cake. You don't want to just throw away cake pieces. And you can always just ignore what I just did, flip the cake on the opposite side and just use the bottom because the gravity will naturally flatten it out. but that's just not really the professional way to do it. You really should cut it off if you want a professional cake. But anyway, I'm going to go get a Tupperware to put that piece of cake in and cut my other layer. Okay, so we're ready to go ahead and build our cake. So one of the first things you want to do is you want to get a piping bag. I have an 823 star tip, and put some icing into it. And I'll show you why you want to do it as one of your first steps. Then you want to take a little smear of icing and put it on top of your board that you're going to be using to display your cake, because that's going to act like a glue to hold the cake in place. So we're going to go ahead and put our layer down. Remember to keep your entire area as free of crumbs as much as possible. It's not so important on this cake because it has the finished cake has kind of a pattern look to it. But for other cakes, especially with white icing, you want to make sure to keep as much of the crumbs out of it as possible. And the best way to do that is to make sure your entire work surface is clean. So the next step you want to do, and this is optional, you don't always have to do this if you don't want to, is you can put some simple syrup onto your cake, which helps add some moisture and some sweetness and a little bit of flavor if you flavored your simple syrup in any way. This is completely optional. Not everybody likes to do this, but it just helps gives an extra layer of moistness to your cake. Grocery stores do this, cake boutiques, bakeries, everyone pretty much does this in the industry. It's pretty common practice, so it's not so unusual. Then you just want to go ahead and let the simple syrup soak in. And to make simple syrup, it's equal parts of sugar and water boiled on the stove. You can add an acid like cream of tartar to help prevent crystallization, and as soon as it comes to a boil, it's good to go. Just take it off the stove, let it cool off, and you have simple syrup. And you can use simple syrup for just about anything, really, you use sugar for. Iced tea is a really good example because, sugar doesn't melt in cold liquids very easily as it does in hot liquids. So have sugar that's already melted. Do it for you. So anyway, the next step is to pipe a little outline using your star tip. And it's not so important to use a star tip at this point. But the only reason I have it in a star tip is because I'm going to need it later, so I might as well have it in the bag as I need it, so that way I don't have to switch bags just to change the tip. Okay, now we need to go ahead and finish our filling. Okay, so this is what our filling looks like now before we add any of the nuts or the nuts, the coconut or the pecans. So you can see it's just a yellow, thick custard. Okay, and then in a pretty large bowl, I'm going to go ahead and add in our filling. And we're going to go ahead and fold them together. Okay, and then what you want to do is once you have your filling mixed together with the nuts, go ahead and put about half of it into the middle of your cake. It's probably a lot more than what I need. I'll go ahead and smooth this down. And the reason we put the ring around the cake is that way if the filling pushes out at all, what comes out is icing and not filling. So that way it doesn't ruin our icing on the side of our cake. Okay, once we have that smoothed down, we can go ahead and put our top layer on. Okay, go ahead and push down carefully to seal the cake. Okay, next step is to put on the simple syrup. Okay, once your simple syrup is soaked in, we can go ahead and add the rest of our German chocolate cake filling. This is the other half. I don't know if I'll need all of it. I'm going to use probably most of it. Probably should just use the rest of it because I'm not going to use it for anything else, right? Okay, so the best way to ice a round cake, or at least the way I was taught in school, is to reach over your cake and kind of just press it into the side. We got to be careful not to pull any of the filling off the top as we work the icing on, but we should be okay. Remember, my icing was in the refrigerator while I was getting my cake ready, while cutting my layers. So the icing's a little bit thicker. It's a nice consistency to ice a cake with. And then I re-whipped it when I was right before I started working on the cake. We've got plenty of icing to work with since we have our filling helping us out occupy space. Okay, then once you have your sides completely covered, you can do this with a bench scraper or your spatula, however you feel comfortable, and just kind of run along the side of the cake to smooth it out. You want to hold your spatula as still as possible while you're running along the cake. And then check for any areas that need to be touched up, like any pockets. Kind of go back and fix those. Smooth out the rim that formed along the top of your cake. Okay, so once you go ahead and smooth down the rim that forms around the top of your cake from smoothing the sides, also after you smooth the sides, and let's see, after you do all that, you might need to do it a couple times to get it done. We're going to go ahead and pipe a shell border to help give it a nice finished look. So that way all these really uneven portions of the rim that formed along the side of the cake will be covered up by a nice fancy border. So remember, to do a shell border, what you want to do is you want to start on a down position, and then you want to go forward a little bit, kind of come up, and then pull back. So that way you're kind of doing like a sideways J. Remember to, also clean off the cardboard or the cake circle. Okay, we're also going to do one along the bottom. Okay, and once you finish the bottom of your cake, that's pretty much it. Your German chocolate cake is finished and ready to serve. Now, if you wanted to, and actually I think it might be a good idea, you might want to finish it off with a cake comb to kind of give it a textured side. I think a smooth side is a little boring for this cake, especially with all the texture on the top, but that's for next time, so that way I remember it for next time. But otherwise, our cake looks pretty good. Okay, so that's how you make a German chocolate cake. Remember that we used a Swiss chocolate buttercream and the Devil's Food chocolate cake recipe from my website to make the German chocolate cake. The only thing that's really unique to this recipe is the German chocolate cake filling, which is made with eggs, heavy cream, nuts, and we cooked on the stove. It's very easy. It's a pretty simple cake to make. It's a little time consuming because every cake's it has several steps, but it's definitely worth it in the end, especially if you make it right. Remember, with the Swiss buttercream, you make sure to wipe out all of your bowls and your utensils with a little bit of vinegar to help prevent the egg whites, or to help make sure the egg whites whip up properly. Remember to cook your egg whites to 120 degrees to make sure that they're strongest. And remember to put them in the refrigerator before you ice your cake to allow it to cool down and firm up, so that way it's easier to ice your cake. Otherwise, especially in the summer, or especially if you're in a hot country or in a hot area of the country, your icing will just be soupy and it'll run off the cake and you'll get frustrated. Your icing is not ruined if it's soupy, it's just too hot. Just think of icing as butter, and you're basically just smoothing on butter that's been a little bit strengthened with egg, but basically it's just all butter. So if the butter is going to be super soft, butter gets soft around like 86 degrees, like 86 to 90 degrees, usually right below body temperature. So if it's like 100 degrees in your house, your icing is going to be really, really soupy. Even if it isn't, even if it's like 80 degrees, your icing will be really soupy. So one of the other things you can do too is to turn up your air conditioning to like 68 degrees to help keep your house cool. So that way it's easier to ice your cake. Whatever trick or method you use, refrigerator being the most convenient, just make sure that you learn the feeling of your icing, so that way if you know it's too soupy, you can go ahead and stop right away. But anyway, I hope you learned a lot today. Thanks for watching, and remember, the Aubergine Chef, demystifying dessert one recipe at a time.